Bibliophiles of the internet, I'm Adri, and today I'm here to bring you my Queer Lit Readathon wrap-up. If you don't know already, the Queer Lit Readathon is a week-long event where you read nothing but queer books. It was created by the incredible Rogan and Kathy, and the guest host from this past round was Alex. They're all amazing content creators, and their channels will be linked down below, so definitely check them out. For this most recent round, I was able to read 6 things. Most of them were super short, so it sounds way more impressive than it actually is, but that's just called strategy, baby. Jumping right in, the first book I read was my arc of The One True Me and You by Remy K. England, also known as MK England. This comes out on March 1st of next year from Wednesday Books. It's this author's debut contemporary novel, and it's a dual POV story about a geeky fanfic writer named Kay and a pageant queen named Tegan who happen to be attending overlapping events. Kay is going to GreatCon, which is a convention for a Sherlock Holmes-specific fandom, and that same hotel is also being used as the home base for the Miss Cosmic Teen USA pageant. Being from a small town, Kay is using this weekend as a chance to experiment with gender expression and pronouns, and they want to kiss a girl for the very first time, and they happen to run into Tegan, who's also a member of the same fandom, as she's trying to sneak into some events and meetups. Content warnings for some references to fat phobia, bullying, homophobia and homophobic slurs, grief and references to loss of a parent, brief mention of suicide, and public outing. I really enjoyed this. It's less than 300 pages, so it's a super fast-paced, really fun story that's all about embracing queerness, and I think it's ultimately a love letter to fandom as a safe space. It takes place over this one weekend, so it has a very limited, accelerated timeline, which I think really works because it highlights the chaos of those two different events, and it makes you really feel how much is at stake for both characters. They both want to accomplish very specific things before the weekend is over, and I think they find a sense of empowerment because they're occupying a different space than the ones they usually do, so they kind of feel like it's a now or never type of situation before they have to go back to their everyday lives. I also think the story explores authenticity in really thoughtful ways. It's about navigating between safety, self-expression, and authenticity, and what it looks like to not only discover your true self, but be your true self, and figure out which people and spaces are safe for those experiences. Over the course of the story, both characters are experiencing that feeling of validation from their friends and their found family for what's really the first time, and I think that's really powerful to witness. I also appreciate how both characters contain multitudes, beyond fandom, beyond pageantry, and how their differences challenge the other person to grow. At first, Kay is really uncomfortable with Tegan being a pageant queen, and I think that's because that space highlights their own dysphoria, their own discomfort with anything feminine, and even their own internalized misogyny and sexism to some extent. As they learn more about Tegan and the pageant, I think they realize that there is power and beauty in feminine expression, which can be respected even if that's not the way you express yourself, and also that there's so much more than just the surface level beauty that factors into pageants. At the same time, Tegan's perspective is also being broadened by the time she's spending with Kay, especially in these fandom spaces, which are very inclusive in terms of gender, sexuality, body type, and age. And taking all of that in is forcing her to rethink her own beauty standards and realize how much more the pageant scene still needs to progress. So there's things both characters are learning from each other that they can take back into their own respective spaces, and in a way they're both teaching each other how to feel that sense of validation and confidence. At the same time, I appreciate how the story refuses to romanticize either fandom or pageants, especially in the way it acknowledges that both can be toxic and problematic in their own ways. But they can also be empowering at times, and it's possible for both of those things to be true at once. So it's very layered and there's a lot of things going on, but it's also just fun and sweet and romantic. There's great banter and humor, there's a great connection and chemistry between the two main characters, and overall I think there's 2 relatively satisfying character arcs. Because of its length, I do think some parts feel a bit rushed at times, and I think there was also more room for complex conversations regarding identity and privilege that just didn't happen, but on the same token, being able to see this kind of queer joy is just wonderful and cathartic. I gave this a solid 4 stars. In terms of the bingo board for this book, I got to check off trans debut because again, it's technically this author's contemporary debut and they are trans, the free space, which was to read an arc, as well as rainbow cover and queer joy. After that, I read Volume 2 and Volume 3 of Boys Run the Riot, translated by Leo McDonough and written by Gaku Keto. This is about a trans mask main character as written by a trans mask mangaka and translated by a trans team, which is so incredibly rare and important and special and beautiful that I just have to make space to recognize that every time I bring up this series. It's about Ryo, a trans boy who expresses himself with streetwear and street fashion, and one day when he's shopping at a pop-up store, he runs into the intimidating new transfer student from his class. The two of them bond over their shared interest in streetwear and decide to start their own brand. So the whole series is about them trying to find their voice, find their audience, and the challenges they run into trying to kickstart this business. Content warnings for explorations of dysphoria, some gender essentialism and sexism, transphobia, bullying, brief explorations of predatory adults, and underage drinking, as well as public outing. I love that this series exists, and it just makes me feel so much. My favorite thing about this series is how it celebrates characters who are different, and not just in terms of gender or sexuality, but also people who refuse to fit themselves into reductive societal norms and expectations. The series shows how there's so much value in being different, and how there's value in things that exist outside of the traditional life path that gets reinforced everywhere we look. If your goals don't align with traditional education, workplaces, means of expression, or ways of living, that doesn't mean that they're bad or worthless or any less real. It just means that they're different. These young characters are struggling with people refusing to take them seriously, whether it's in terms of their business or in terms of their identity, and you see how that can be really disheartening and cause genuine emotional and mental distress. But at the end of the day, they believe in each other and they believe in themselves, and more importantly, they believe in their vision of the future, and they realize why they have to keep fighting for it no matter what. Their passion and their refusal to be anyone but themselves is what's really striking, and it's what connects their brand to other people, and that fearless commitment is exactly what they have to chase. Ryu is also going through a lot in these 2 volumes in terms of figuring out himself and learning more about how he defines and understands his own manhood, because everything he's been taught about masculinity has been very toxic and reductive up to this point. Especially as a young trans man who has not expressed an interest in HRT or surgeries or legal transition of any kind, which he absolutely does not have to, he occupies a really vulnerable space. I'm curious to see how that progresses, because I think it's really important to show that your transness is not any less just because you don't transition in expected ways, and this series currently disrupts the idea that transition has to look the same way for everyone who's trans. Whether it's societal or cultural limitations or sexism, Ryu really has to fight to be seen as who he is, and I really admire that he's not willing to back down or compromise his sense of self no matter what he's up against. His relationship to masculinity is his own, and he is the only one who gets to define what it means for him to be a man, and no one else gets to make that choice. And even though he's still learning that the hard way, I appreciate that we get to witness that journey as it progresses. I will say that even though this series is doing so much for trans representation, especially in a visual medium, it can be somewhat reductive at times when it comes to explaining gender or sexuality, and I think it does conflate the two a little bit. So I really hope there's more exploration of that in the future, because the series definitely has space for even more nuance. That said, I care about these characters so much and I want them to succeed so badly, which is why I'm still really excited to continue on with the series. I gave these both 4.5 stars. These volumes counted towards the translated space as well as the 40% plus BIPOC space. I didn't know if I'd be able to get to this next book when the week started, but then I decided to add it in just because, and that was my arc of Right Where I Left You by Julian Winters. This comes out next year on March 15th from Penguin Teen, and it's a queer contemporary story about an Afro-Latina boy named Isaac Martin who's trying to cherish every last moment he has with his friends and family before he goes off to college, where he's gonna be by himself for the very first time. He has really bad social anxiety and struggles to make friends, but he does have a lifelong best friend named Diego who completely understands him and accepts him as he is. So as a kind of last hurrah, Isaac has the perfect plan to snag them passes to Legend Con before they go to their first ever Teen Pride, which is happening on the same weekend. But the day tickets go on sale, Isaac unexpectedly runs into his former crush and misses the window to get those coveted passes. Now he's trying to navigate reconnecting with this crush and possibly dating, while also trying to make up for his mistake with Diego before their summer finishes out and they have to go their separate ways. Content warnings for brief references to infidelity and divorce, descriptions of social anxiety, some exploration of depression and mental health, and some exploration of emotional trauma and family estrangement. Julian Winters has never let me down a day in his life, and he sure as hell is not going to start now. This was absolutely fantastic. Julian has done it once again. He has written a wonderful, vulnerable, tender, heartfelt coming-of-age story that is undoubtedly going to resonate with so many folks. Even though the story does have an underlying romantic friends-to-lovers arc, I wouldn't personally call it a romance because it focuses more on self-discovery and the growing pains that come with that process. It's more so an exploration of how the foundational experiences and relationships that shape our lives play a big role in how we learn to love ourselves and the people around us. romance. Just like The One True Me and You, this story is a love letter to fandom, and I think it goes about it in a really interesting way because the characters aren't actually going to this huge convention, which is what you would expect, but they're still connected by fandom in so many ways. I love how much Isaac loves this fictional comic series called Disaster Academy and how strongly he feels connected to two of the superheroes, Charm and Reverb, who are showing him what queer love between two boys of color can look like. The story does such an amazing job of celebrating how fictional characters can touch our lives and help us learn more about who we truly are, and how some characters give us a template to recognize ourselves and understand ourselves, sometimes for the very first time. Sometimes it's easier to recognize something in someone else versus ourselves, and sometimes stories show us that the things we thought were impossible for ourselves are actually within our reach. I also really love the tenderness and softness between Isaac and Diego. There's such a familiarity, a casual intimacy, and a kind of domesticity that exists between them where they're completely comfortable around each other and they always know that the other person will be their safe space. Throughout the story, we get to see their shared joy, their comfort, their sadness, their pain, their vulnerability, and also healthy displays of masculinity where they don't feel the need to hedge their emotions or obscure their truest, messiest selves. It's not a perfect relationship by any means, and they're definitely going through some stuff when it comes to insecurity, trust, and fear, but I love that they can always fall back on each other and pick up right where they left off. The family dynamics in this story are also some of Julian's best work, in my opinion. That's a big part of why I see this as a coming-of-age narrative versus a romance, because Isaac's family life has become much more fraught ever since his parents' divorce. There's a lot of emotional trauma there that he hasn't unpacked yet, and it does impact his relationship with his parents and his siblings, but also with himself, and that's something that he has to confront as the story progresses. Even he doesn't realize how much energy and space holding onto that anger and pain is taking up, and subconsciously it does affect his ability to create relationships with other people, romantically, platonically, or otherwise. And I think it's so important how the story shows that people are deeply imperfect no matter their age or where they are in their journey. Nobody has all the answers, and there's always room to heal and to grow. I could say so much more about this book and never do it justice. It's funny, it's emotional, it has tons of YA Easter eggs to find, it has a fantastic found family element, a super sweet romance between Latina childhood friends, and it is just absolutely triumphant. I gave it 5 stars. This book once again counted for the free space, queer joy, and the 40% plus BIPOC space. On the same day, I also finished The Bokobo Sugar Days, translated by Christine Dashiell and written by Yusen Atsuko. It's a queer slice-of-life yaoi manga about these two childhood friends, Rui and Yujiro, and when they were kids, Yujiro was typically the protector who took care of Rui, but now that they're older, Rui is actually the taller of the two, but oddly enough, their dynamic is not that much different. And even though he's taller and bigger, it turns out that Rui is still very much soft and cutesy and clumsy, and the two of them have had crushes on each other since they were kids, but neither of them knows it. Content warnings for some internalized homophobia and sexism, and some explicit sexual content. I'm gonna try to keep this brief because I don't have too much to say. Overall, this was a really fun, sweet manga volume. It definitely reads more like a series of cutesy one-shots rather than focusing on one story arc, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. I appreciate how the story challenges gender roles and makes space for gender nonconformity, especially with allowing Rui to play with feminine expression without it being treated as a joke. As a character, even though he's perceived as more masculine, he's really soft and delicate, and he likes to express himself in feminine ways, and I appreciate how that's accepted and even encouraged by the people around him instead of it being framed as an undesirable thing or a weakness. This manga definitely has strong disaster energy, which I really enjoy. I like that comedic element of both characters embarrassing themselves and freaking out around each other because they don't know how the other person feels. I do wish that the height difference factored into the story a little bit more because it's notable enough to be in the synopsis, but there's not really any conflict or plot surrounding it, and I found myself wishing that it was more present than it actually was. And while I do appreciate how Rui is accepted for being more feminine, I think the story potentially falls into that trap of quote-unquote justifying queerness between men because one is masculine and one is feminine, when actually none of that matters and gender roles are fake. So I think there could have been some more nuance in that respect, and I also wish that we got to see more of their friendship, especially with them growing up together, because it kind of felt like the story was missing that. So yes, I enjoyed it, I had a good time reading it, but I did want the story to make me feel a little bit more in general, so overall I gave this 3 stars. This manga once again counted for the translated space and the 40% plus BIPOC space. Because I finished all of that earlier than I expected, on the last day I was able to squeeze in The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Leese. It's an adult holiday romance novella about Gabby, who's a demisexual and autistic bookseller full of holiday spirit, and her arch nemesis is her co-manager Jonathan, who hates the holidays and is super analytic and emotionally distant. assistant. They both work at the same independent bookstore, which is facing some financial hardship, and unless there's some kind of Christmas miracle, either Gabby or Jonathan could very well find themselves unemployed in the new year due to budget cuts. So they strike a deal that whoever sells the most books in the month of December will be the manager who gets to stay. But as Gabby tries to outsell Jonathan, she begins to see another side of him and realizes that he may not be as cold-hearted as she thought. Content warnings for some brief instances of stalking in regards to a past ex, some discussions of ableism, and some explicit sexual content. I am so glad I took a chance on reading this at the last minute because it was so delightful, so refreshing, such a sweet romance, and I can confidently say that while this may be my first Chloe Leese, it will certainly not be my last. Chloe Leese is both autistic and demisexual herself, so while I can't speak to the autism rep, it does come from her personal experience, and I also wanted to note that the love interest, Jonathan, has type 1 diabetes as well, so there's also representation for that. I think Gabby is such a great heroine. She knows exactly who she is, she makes sure to communicate what she needs with people she trusts, and she knows that no one is entitled to her diagnosis if she doesn't want them to know. Her dynamic with Jonathan is weirdly nice because even though they start off with professional animosity between them, he's still begrudgingly kind to Gabby, and he's learned a lot about her just from working side by side with her every single day. I appreciate how mindful he is about her needs because it really goes to show that we don't need to know someone's entire life story in order to be thoughtful about how we conduct ourselves around other people or to show kindness to the people around us. And related to that, I also love how the story celebrates demisexuality and shows that asexual doesn't necessarily have to mean not having sex. For demisexual people, we generally need to feel bonded in some way in order to feel any kind of sexual attraction, and I appreciate how that's addressed in this story, especially because you wouldn't expect Gabby to feel sexually interested in someone she doesn't seem to like very much. But because they've worked together for so long and shared space and also interest to some degree for so long, they do technically have a bond of sorts. Sometimes there's this idea that you have to date someone for a long time, or that you need to feel positively about them, or that you need to know someone very intimately or personally, when actually connection comes in all shapes and sizes. Going back to the romance, there's such a great chemistry between the characters, which is really well developed even in this short amount of narrative space. I really love the back and forth between them, the banter, getting to see them challenge each other and break down each other's walls, and there are times when the dialogue feels like it could rival something out of a historical romance novel, but it somehow doesn't feel out of place. There's even a cute little recreation of the infamous Elizabeth Darcy hand flex scene, which I enjoyed very much. There's such a sweet and cozy and safe dynamic that develops between these two characters, and I love how they both realize that they're unfairly projecting a lot of their own insecurities on the other person, which is why they haven't been friendlier before this, and ultimately their differences help them both to grow in some way. This was a short, fluffy holiday romance novella, but I feel like I got so much out of it and I enjoyed every single second. It does get a little bit cheesy and idealistic at times, but that's hardly a bad thing. In the end, I gave this 4.5 stars. This counted for the novella space and also the Beyond LGBT space. At the end of the week, this is what my bingo board looked like. I got one traditional bingo in the third column, but I was also able to check off all of the yellow squares, which I feel like is also a bingo of sorts. So there you have it. Those are all the books I read for round 8 of the Queer Lit Readathon. I believe they've already posted their dates for next year, so I will link that down below as well if you would like to take part yourself and prepare for the upcoming rounds. As always, if you've read any of these books yourself, or if you plan to, let me know what you thought down below, or feel free to share what you read yourself in the comments down below. But that's everything I had for this wrap up today. I will see you in 2022, and until then, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.